Hi there, it's been a while, but here is a proper video. So for a while I've been working on a dynamic kill house. So kill house is all the rage for some reason. And I wanted to make one that would regenerate or auto-generate to give you a different experience each time, whilst also, and this is the important bit, not looking shit or being very repetitive. So that's quite hard. I mean, a kill house is sort of by its very nature repetitive. Here's one I made earlier, and here it is with another another layout, and some of these are very far from optimal, but I'm working on that. That's a better one. Still some funny little bits, and yeah, and it's a work in progress. It's going to have doors that are placed in more sensible places. It's going to have props and things inside it. The doors will be actually doors, and you can resize it, and you can see that in some cases, pardon me, I've got templates for buildings which have non-square shapes, and it's reflecting and rotating stuff to get the greatest variety. Got another template size I've put in. Whoop. So this has a lot more templates. There's a smaller size building. So there's only so many ways you can split up the rooms, but actually you do get quite a lot of variety having a few more basic templates. So you have a corridor area and everything else gets filled in automatically. And this will look better with doors in the right places and props and so on. So that's what it does, and it's quite complicated. It's taken me quite a while. I've done it in C++. It seemed the sensible choice for something of this complexity. I think it's about how many lines? 8,300 plus the header files, got a lot in it. So it is a big project, and I've done it bit by bit, and I've built in a lot of tools for debugging stuff. Even just things that draw pictures can take a bit of a while to code up. Here it is, most recently doing the perimeter finding. Quite pleased with that. That seems to work alright. Yeah, so that is, get you out of there. What it is, and basically how I do it is to create a grid and then to place rooms in the grid with some exceptions. But let me first do a little talk about what I found out about procedurally generating buildings. I should say Houdini is a thing. Houdini is a remarkably flexible program for doing procedural generation of stuff. I haven't looked at it in detail. It's very powerful and it's got a huge learning curve by all accounts. So I'm not going to talk about Houdini. I'm not able to. It can do wonderful things like you draw a spline and it will then create a mesh around the spline that looks like a totally believable corridor. And you can do junctions. It will create junctions in a nice natural way. So that's very powerful, but that's not what I'm doing here. It's just taking a 2D space and filling it with building, and the aim is to make it look plausible. And my take on that, working from first principles, just using my own analysis, is that buildings basically have access areas, corridors, entrance halls, and off those come all the rooms. So if you define your access areas reasonably, the rest follows. So goes the plan. And you can put different kinds of props, or maybe not so many props in the access areas because they are to access. And they also, looking forwards, provide an easier way to add things like stairs and second stories. Having done all I've done to get to this stage, I think it will be relatively easy, not easy but relatively easy, to just have second stories appearing with staircases linking the two. I've thought how to do that, and I think it'll work pretty well. So that's fun anyway, and even like this, if I can fix up the doors a bit, it'll be fine for kill houses. Because a lot of games like Squad, Ground Branch, this is mainly made for Ground Branch, but it has application in other games. I could see it being quite popular as it is almost. to let people train just in an unknown space. Could even be fun to have two teams playing, so it gives you unexpected cover and it will stop levels getting so repetitive. I did have a broader scheme to have a play area incorporating a number of these buildings and even to place them randomly with random sizes in an area. But I need to get the buildings working fine first before getting more adventurous. So, a word about the history. So, one of the first procedurally generated building areas of sorts that I'm aware of is Rogue, which is an old text-based dungeon adventure system. This is a screenshot from it. And a lot of things were fairly unique about it, quite interesting. The gameplay was limited, but I'll come back to that. And essentially you have rooms and doors and connecting passages. And the size and shape of the rooms is random to a degree. It could be that it's in a grid system, by the looks of it, a 3x3 grid, I don't know. But with this system, the hard bit is getting the passages connecting the two, and it wouldn't be too hard to come up with a custom routine that would create a meandering sort of pattern. It might use predefined shapes, or it might just randomly go forwards, left, right, and the probability of a left and a right would depend on where it is relative to the other place. So the probability of going left at that point would be higher than the probability of going right, for example. If I was doing it, that's what I'd do. But that might get things slightly too windy. Anyway, I digress. So that's the first thing. So there are other games that came after Rogue. This is NetHack, and same principle really, but people coded it up and developed things. I mean, the gameplay is extremely deep. That's not relevant to the generation, but I mean, it's got so much depth to it, and so many different ways things can interact, and it's got a massive complexity that I think might be going a little too far. But you have the same principle of rooms and connecting passages that are defined. And there are other kinds of levels. So this is a cavern level, and this is generated by a different method. Looks like it's sort of randomly carved out from rock. And even newer games like Minecraft probably use similar methods to sort of meander tunnels in and out of things. And you also have set pieces. So you have sort of template buildings, maybe with stuff around them, or maybe just the whole level as a template. And the stuff in the level is filled in randomly. That's not hard. And the combination of the random level and the random stuff in it gives you quite varied gameplay. Just being random doesn't mean that it's fun, and it doesn't mean that it's consistent. So you can, with these systems, get an impossible level on level 1, you can get impossible monsters on level 1, or you can get very easy, nice playthroughs some of the time. There's a lot of what are called rogue clones, roguelikes, similar principles. Here's another one quickly, which is called Larn. It's one of the first ones I played, but you can see here it's got a slightly different approach, and different levels are made by different means, but this is a new type. This essentially is a maze generator with areas carved out of it, and I don't know the precise method that's done, but it creates an interesting combination of features, but it's relatively simple. I mean, you can find maze generation algorithms, just Google one. So that's quite nice. And then you have other levels which look like they are generated differently, still randomly, and maybe it's a combination of templates, but this looks a bit different, so there's something else going on here. And here there's clearly some sort of template involved there and there, in the middle and in the side. And so some work has gone into making these levels a bit more distinctive. And here again, a lot of template work. And being able to integrate templates with navigable paths has some challenges, because you have to check that everything is navigable, and generally in these games everything is. You can get to anywhere in the level from anywhere else in the level by and large. So that takes a bit of work to make sure that happens, and there's different ways you deal with that I'm not fully familiar with, but that's just an observation. There are other more recent games. I mean, lots of stuff is done in a random way. Diablo 2 and I guess 3 and I think 1 were notable at the time. the early 90s was Diablo 2, I think, or 1. They were notable for having random dungeons, and I found that kind of dungeon generation to be extremely boring. I think it wasn't a very good use of randomization, and I think the Diablo games use what I would call the Carcassonne method, where you have a grid and each part of the grid has defined exit and entry points, not all of which may be used, and you just slot the rooms together randomly in a grid and see what comes out. I mean, with Carcassonne, you use a bit of skill and judgment to decide what piece to put where. Otherwise, you might get completely absurd results. But by and large, with something like Carcassonne, you get interesting, unique maps from basic building blocks that are put together randomly. And I believe Diablo does this in their dungeons that are random, which is most of them, just by having predefined rooms or bits of room, and it slots them together randomly on a grid. So that works, I guess, and it looks pretty, but it's a little bit boring, a little bit limited, because the structure size is always the same size. You can only have so much continuous structure in a certain area before you have to tidy it up and then tile to the next tile. So a bit limited, I think. I think that gets a bit boring after a while. And so there are some sources of information on the stuff. I found a place called the Procedural Content Generation Wiki, which isn't quite on point for the dungeon generation stuff, but there's a lot here to start you off if you're interested in looking at stuff. And there's ways to generate maps in the sense of sort of terrain, but dungeon generation is what I think people call the stuff that I'm doing, and there's a few specific methods mentioned there. So what do? I basically started from first principles, just try to think of some way to put it together in a convenient way, and most of my stuff is template based, but I'm fiddling it as I go along. The room access, the corridors and entrance halls, those are the things which are most template based. They're quite distinctive. They have very sort of long spindly shapes, quite interesting shapes, and so I have a spreadsheet, and I settled on the idea of just using a text field to define them, because at one level you want to encode is there a bit of room there or not. That's easy, but in some cases for the buildings templates you need to encode where are the doors, is this corridor or is this a room, and so at the top you can see an example of a less straightforward room access feature. I've mostly for the room access gone with is it there or not. If I move now to the building templates, same principle, same data, but you can see some of these, the equal sign I've used to define a corridor or room access. There's no distinction. The circumflex, the up arrow, defines a door going in that direction, going upwards. There's the left and right triangular brackets, and then I've used the hash sign. There's no other good alternative for defining a downwards door. I say upwards, downwards door. It's because a basic problem I had is how to represent and encode the data, because you have what's in each cell, which can be a room or corridor space, but you have also to define what happens between the cells, the walls. Is there a wall there or not? What kind of wall? Is it a window? Is it a door? And there's no easy way that I found to encode wall data in this sort of form without being very unwieldy. I've got dumps of wall data, but that would be very hard to produce manually to stick back in. So I've got special characters, special codes which define features that are interstitial, let's say, things between the cells. And this just about works. It's got its limits. So I can define the doors. I can determine, starting from this cell, there'd be a door on this side of it. And equally, you could have put a door sign in an adjacent cell and had the reversed sign, and it would still put a door in the same place. So there's some redundancy there, which doesn't seem to be very satisfactory. But as a way of just coding up building templates, this works. For the level of complexity I've got at the moment, that just works. So I'm sticking with that. I would like to go back in time and change the way that I've encoded the walls. What I've done is for each cell, I've got an array of 4 entries, and it corresponds to north, east, south, west. And each entry is a type or thing, which is either undefined, there is no wall, or it's an internal wall with door, or an external wall, external wall with window or door, and that works. But because of this redundancy, you get two items for each wall. You get one cell on one side and then the adjacent cell on the other side. Both relates to the same wall, so you have the problem of what if those two things are not the same. How do you end up there, and how do you resolve that? Because at the end of this, just going back to this thing, each wall is turned into a list of data. There's a data list saying what meshes do I want to build and where do I want to build them. And I only want to have one wall mesh built for every wall. So the way I deal with this is to basically clean the wall data to say if there's more than one wall in the same space, go with the best version of the wall. So if I've got an internal wall and an internal wall with door, what was intended was an internal wall with door. So one cell will have that door, the other cell will be blanked out. And that imposes the limitation that these walls must be symmetrical, must be reversible, that if I have one cell with a wall on this side, it ends up being exactly the same produced as if I have this cell with a wall on that side. This is implementation detail, but it's a thing I had to figure out. When I build a building, I place the room access features first, I fit them, I use scoring, I generate the best ones and pick them. It's still flawed, I need to get it better. And I might build one or two rooms from templates, but they're more or less what I end up with normally, which is that whatever I've got left, I randomly subdivide. If it's over 70% chance, I'll subdivide a room along the longest dimension, and I'll do it either one side or the other side of the center of it, or plus or minus. So just that simple method of subdividing randomly is responsible for most of this diversity. Is just the rooms being subdivided randomly. So that's a random subdivision. I'll find one that's not. Great. So this is a room from a template, and this doesn't work very well. I don't like that, what it does, so I need to change that bit of code. But that's not subdividing, and that is. Anyway, so it's not doing an awful lot in the end, but it gives me a good enough building, the combination of the template for the room access and the mostly subdivided rooms. That's pretty plausible. The doors need to be put in better places. I need to make sure every room can be reached. I need to make sure the rooms have doors to the room access, and maybe room doors elsewhere, but everything comes off a corridor somewhere, and the corridors have to come out to the exterior, and everything else can be tweaked a bit randomly. But that's basically it. I hope that's informative, helpful. Alright, bye. A little postscript is that, of course, there are tools out there to do dungeon generation of various kinds. Just on the Epic marketplace, you've got lots of modular stuff because that's how things are done these days. But there are generators. I haven't looked at these. I don't know how each of these works. But they look sophisticated in a way that mine is not. So if you want to just build a random actual dungeon, I would look here at how they do it. I would consider making use of somebody else's time who's actually got it working, because it can take a long time to get it working, I can assure you. So these are different methods to what I'm doing. And Unity has some, and so it's all out there.